Hello and welcome to Kitchen Table Talks. My name is Toni Austin Allen and I am here with Dr. Roy Austin, author of Definitions for Living, a book dedicated to helping you live more effectively and happily, both personally and in your relationships with others. A number of years ago, Dr. Austin compiled numerous articles which he had written to assist his clients into what is now his book, Definitions for Living, making sense of words and ideas that define our lives. Recently, he and I began sitting at our kitchen table and talking about his book, and we became excited about the possibility of sharing our conversations with others who might benefit from them. The podcast you are about to listen to are the product of the recordings we began making of our conversations. We have discussed the book chapter by chapter and have produced this series of podcasts to accompany the printed version of the book, which is now available as an ebook on various publishing websites. Although we believe you will benefit greatly from the podcasts themselves, you will get the most out of them by purchasing the book, reading each chapter prior to listening to the podcast, and having it available to follow along with our conversations. The ebook is available on Amazon Kindle, Barnes & Noble, Scribe, Booktopia, Apple Books, Layman's, and Adlibris. We hope you enjoy our talks at our kitchen table as much as we have, and that your life will be greatly enriched by having shared our conversations with us.
All right, we're at Chapter 16, Negotiation Skills. And, in a relationship, we're probably negotiating every single day of our lives, but there are some situations where we really need to be more aware of how we're negotiating. I know most of us think of negotiating in the business world. We don't usually think about how we're negotiating in relationships, personal relationships.
That is so true, Toni. When it's done well in the business world, business people do follow these basic principles that we're going to be talking about. There are 8 of them, and we'll go through them briefly in just a few moments. But as everyone knows, if they've had anything to do with the business world, that business is often done more through manipulation and coercion than it is in basic, healthy, appropriate negotiation skills. So none of us is really naive at this point of thinking that the business world always does it well. More often than not, they do not do it well. And
I want it. I'm going to get it, no matter what.
Exactly. So we see it done badly in the business world, but in those occasions when a business does use negotiation appropriately, those are really healthy businesses. They may not be the most lucrative and prosperous businesses because they don't do it badly. But
wait, just for the listeners, this is not, he's not condoning doing bad business skills.
That's right. So I have written these basic 8 steps of negotiation skills rather in formal fashion, and it sounds rather stilted and legalized in its presentation, but we'll get to that in just a few moments of how that can be adapted to personal relationships. But so often, as you said, in our personal relationships, we do not think about or know how to do it correctly, and that's why so many personal relationships go at least as badly as business relationships go because it's not done correctly.
Well, I'd like to read paragraph 4 of this first page of negotiation skills, and it's coming right off of thinking about our negotiation skills in commerce and actually looking at them in personal relationships. So this is the 4th paragraph. In personal relationships, however, we sometimes fail to see the importance of negotiation. It is as if we view our private lives as functioning on a totally separate system than the one used in the business world. We often enter personal relationships expecting to please each other simply upon request. The thought that our needs may conflict at times and require negotiation may not occur to us at first. It is only when our individual interests do conflict, as they eventually will, that we are faced with having to negotiate a solution. We may or may not be well skilled in negotiation, or else may feel it should not apply to our private lives. If so, we will be left with but one alternative. Without negotiation, the only other means of having our needs met is through manipulation. Anytime manipulation techniques are used, the relationship deteriorates, for by its very nature, manipulation creates resistance and anger. Anytime we coerce people to please us against their will, we begin a process that can end only in resentment and estrangement. I mean, it's very different than a toddler lying on his back screaming because he can't have that candy. The mom's going to be there eventually and love him. It doesn't always happen that way between two adults, does it?
Right. Yeah, there is an old myth that we're all familiar with that says love conquers all. Mm-hmm. And that is far from the truth.
Yeah.
People falling in love and getting into a relationship, they just sort of naively assume because they want to, they're in that infatuation period when everything is rosy and we love each other so much that we're always going to please each other and we're both going to give and take and everything's going to run smoothly. And then when you get into the relationship, you find out that no, our needs are going to be conflicting many, many times. Pretty early on in the relationship, we find out all is not roses and peaches and cream in a relationship. And this is where negotiation comes in. But in most cases, this is where manipulation comes in. Mm-hmm. We try to coerce someone to please us when we all of a sudden discover that our partner may not want to do everything we want them to do to please us, when during the infatuation stage we were just falling all over ourselves to please each other and put our best foot forward and make a good impression. But then when that infatuation stage starts to fade, as it must and naturally does, then this is where this chapter becomes very, very important.
That makes a lot of sense. Well, let's go on over to the 8 basic skills of negotiation. And I'll just read the headings and then let you go into it just a little bit on each.
Surely.
Okay. Number 1, decide what you want.
This one and the next one is a plea for the readers and the listeners to take into account that before you begin any kind of discussions with someone else that's going to possibly lead to the need for some negotiation going on, is that we have to do some homework ourselves before we ever sit down and talk with the other person. We need to plan ahead and think it through as far as what do we want, because a lot of times we'll just start saying what we want, or we have a complaint that basically a complaint is a request turned inside out. Mm-hmm. That's what a complaint is. Mm-hmm. People will tell us what they don't like instead of telling us what they would like instead. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes we just begin with complaints or a sense of dissatisfaction or unhappiness or pouting or frustration or anger. And it sort of comes out in an unplanned stage because we've not done our homework inside our heads first before we ever sit down and talk to our partner about what's going on inside our minds. And so the reason I mentioned this first one is that we need to think ahead of saying, well, what do I want in this situation that I'm getting ready to share with my partner? And I need to sometimes just write it down. It's not necessarily that we'll make it a formal document, but at least for our own purposes, it's good to get a piece of paper and pencil or on our device and jot down some ideas. It may be one thing that we want, or it may be two, or it may be more than that.
Which means, which I need to say out loud, number 2 is decide what you want most. And that would be critical when you have more than one thing.
Yes. So if you want 3 or 4 things, then the list gets rather complicated when you're going to have a conversation that's going to include several wants at the same time. So I always encourage people to limit what you want to as few as possible for the purposes of any one discussion. Because if you throw in the kitchen sink about how many things you want and they sort of stacked up in your mind over time because you haven't been talking about it as you have gone along, and you're going to try to cover a lot of ground in one conversation, that gets really convoluted and confusing. Mm-hmm. But sometimes that does happen. You may want 2 or 3 things, and then you have to decide, like you said, number 2 is decide what you want most, because that's the beginning of negotiation, because negotiation is going to include being willing to give up something that you do want, but you want it less than something else that you want more. Mm-hmm. And so you focus on what you want most, so that's the focus of your energy, because the giving up of stuff has to come from the bottom of the list of what you want least. So you have to have some cushion there, some wiggle room of what you're going to give up if you have to. And that's why you need to do your homework first, so that you don't go in without having thought it through. Mm-hmm.
The one thing I'd like to say about number 1 and 2 is how crucial it is, because so many of us have trouble even knowing what we want in life. We don't even think about it. We're just kind of going along with what happens. And so when you get to that point where your insides are saying, I need a change, this is not okay, then you really are forced to really look at what you want. And I think a lot of people go through that in midlife, and all of a sudden they're just going berserk because they're feeling stuck and they don't really know what they want, so they go get a new car, They just want something. But this is really making ourselves look at what it is we need in our life right then.
Well, that midlife crisis example that you gave is a good one, because that's an example of a lot of people wanting to have their cake and eat it too. Like, for instance, a part of them may want stability of whatever form that might take. In certain relationships, or in a job, or in a lifestyle. But another part of them wants change and novelty and excitement and challenge. And that's that midlife crisis. They don't call it a crisis for no reason at all.
It's 2 conflicting, opposing needs or wants.
Yes, and you can't have it both ways. Mm-hmm. And that's just where the crisis comes, is when at any time our point in our life, on a small scale or on a larger scale, like a lifestyle change, which is typically what the midlife crisis is about. Part of us wants to hang on to the past, and part of us wants to move into a future style that's different, and so we struggle back and forth. And so this is where it helps to sit down and write it out. Not only what do I want, because I want both of those things. Mm-hmm. I want the stability that comes with business as usual, but I want the challenges and the excitement that comes with changing things in my life. But I have to realize I can't have it both ways. And so writing it out and weighing it, not just numbering the list of things you want and don't want, but also weighing each thing that you want and don't want.
That makes a lot of sense. Number 3, lay it all on the table. And that's when you talk to the other person or the other people, right?
Yes, this is when the conversation begins, is when you have decided, both of you have decided what you want and what you don't want and what you want to change and what you're going to get ready to ask the other person for.
It may just be one person coming to the other, right?
Yes, it could be. But that starts the conversation. Now, there would be some who, here again, in a manipulation world, they'd say, now that I don't like this number 3 of laying it all on the table. I want to hold some things close to the chest. I want to have a hidden agenda here and not tell the other person all the things I want because that gives them too much information to manipulate me with or to bargain with me with. So I want to hold some things back and not let them know what's on my agenda here. This is the manipulative part of so-called negotiation, is that you don't lay it all on the table, but it comes out later, and that's when the other person has a lot of resentment towards you. You know, why didn't you tell me that you also wanted this, or that you also were not going to be willing to do that? So when you hold stuff back, that is the hotbed for resentment later on.
Another hotbed might be if the person who's wanting something comes and is defensive about it. And I can see that because sometimes we're wanting something, when we're holding it in ourselves and we're making up stories about what we think the other person's going to say, and we can come out as defensive when nothing has actually happened.
Yes, because we're assuming we're going to get a bad reaction.
Yeah.
Or with that, we might have to deal with hearing the word no. And people don't like to hear the word no.
No, that is very true.
So that's when the defensiveness comes in. It's sort of a preemptive strike.
Yeah. And then number 4, hear the other party's proposal. Just allowing them to come back and being quiet, right?
Yeah, when we want something to change or we're getting ready to ask the other person, we sometimes just assume that, well, if I ask for it, I'm either going to get it or not get it. But the other person may have some ideas, some of their own proposals, their own suggestions, that they may be defensive about it, of feeling that you're asking something of them they don't want to do or can't do. But they may be willing to open up conversations for that. So you have to be open-minded and let the other person speak their mind as well.
It's funny, I'm just having this image of, and I don't even watch TV very much, but I'm imagining all these sitcoms I've seen, I'm bringing it up again in the past, where a teenager will come up to their parent and they're manipulating the situation. Let me ask them if I can go over to Susie's for a slumber party, a sleepover, while my mom is busy on the phone, and I'll ask them. And they, there's no negotiating plan. They want to catch them and get a yes.
Right.
And so there's many of us that aren't beyond teenagehood, actually.
Well, I think that would be true of most people. we never get past 13 or 14 years old emotionally, and how we do relationships.
And then that heads us into number 5. Conduct the give and take process. Teenagers don't like a give and take process. They want what they want when they want it.
Absolutely. And this is where the maturity test starts coming in. And here again, as an adult, you have to be willing to, up front, recognize, admit to yourself, and prepare for not getting everything you want. And that's why that making a list of what you want most is so very important, because you are likely going to have to give up something somewhere along the way, and you might as well get ready for it. And I'd like for you to read the entirety of that particular paragraph, because it's very, very important.
I will, and then particularly when I get toward the end, I think there's a very strong sentence there. So this is the beginning of this paragraph. Both parties will now have enough information to begin negotiations. Both of you must understand that you need to remain as, and here's the word, flexible as possible throughout the discussions. You must be willing to surrender some of the lesser priority items from your respective lists of desired outcomes to ensure that each will realize some of his or her more important goals. And that's why it's important to decide what you want most.
Yes.
So you can know what you can give up.
Yes.
Both of you need to come from the discussions believing yourselves to be partial winners and partial losers, with no resentment toward each other for having to compromise on some of your goals. That takes some maturity.
That's a real test of maturity right there.
Yeah.
For sure. That last phrase, with no resentment toward each other for having to compromise on some of your goals, that's just real life.
Yeah.
If you can't handle real life and take no for an answer, then that's when manipulation kicks in. And resentment kicks in. Yeah, well, okay, I'll let you have your way here, but I'm going to make you wish you hadn't said no to me.
I'm keeping a list back here, of everything I didn't get.
Exactly.
Yeah. Number 6, stand solid when necessary. And I'll let you expound on that a bit.
Yeah, this is where, when you have decided what you want most, which can sometimes be just simply something very important that you would be willing to do without, but you really, really want it badly. And then sometimes it's so important to you that it does become an ultimatum. It does become something that is non-negotiable. And if you can think that through, like we said at the very beginning, up front, and be honest with yourself about how important something is to you that you want to have happen, then this is where you have to be willing to put your foot down and say, no, this is extremely important to me. Like if someone is in a relationship and their partner begins to gamble, and they have a strong, the other partner has a strong resistance to that, and a strong moral or personal
or financial
resistance to that, and says, no, I did not get into this relationship with you thinking that you're going to become a gambler. Gambling is not allowed in our home, and that's not negotiable here. And sometimes that does come up unexpectedly after you get into a relationship. You'll hit a non-negotiable area or something that's very, very important to you. And so this is where you have to be willing to put your foot down and say, no, this is not something I'm willing to give up easily, so we need to keep talking as long as possible here to see if we can work this out.
But I notice you say present as few non-negotiables as possible, but when you do not back down.
Yeah, if you back down, then see you have gone into the manipulation aspect of the relationship. It's no longer negotiation, because making empty threats is a form of manipulation, just like making empty promises. So if you are going to threaten something, you need to be, as clearly as you can know yourself, be willing to follow through on that threat and not back down, because then you lose integrity there. So if you want to have integrity, if you want people to believe in you and for your word to have any power, you better not be bluffing.
I as a mother of 2 grown children, I saw that with parents all the time. A lot of bluffing going on.
Absolutely.
Number 7, never attempt manipulation. Never attempt manipulation, and you have never underlined, I notice.
That's the tough part.
Never.
Yeah, I want to go ahead and read that in its entirety because it is so important.
Okay.
Because it is the only other alternative you have to negotiation. And this is where most people live, in a world of manipulation, because they either don't know how to negotiate or they're not willing to. And I explained it in this paragraph.
And just real quickly, this explains why being in a narcissistic relationship, it's not, you can't, there's no negotiating in that kind of relationship.
It's a no-win situation. If you're in a relationship with a narcissist, it is not going to turn out well.
It's all manipulation.
It is all about manipulation.
Yeah.
Many people feel comfortable with this process that we're talking about here now, about negotiation, so long as it is producing the results they want. However, if the negotiations begin to stall, they may start out negotiating, but they're not doing it sincerely or committedly. They always have manipulation in their back pocket to use just in case negotiation doesn't work. So it's a hidden agenda back in there, see? So if the negotiations begin to stall, they will often allow the discussions to deteriorate into a power struggle of manipulative techniques. The list of ways people attempt to coerce others to their will is almost endless, including threats, false promises, guilt trips, walkouts, third-party collusions, and temper tantrums, to name only a very few. Understandably, manipulation is a powerful temptation when you begin to sense that things are not going your way. Any negotiation process may be contaminated with various forms and degrees of coercive techniques, but to whatever extent they are used, the outcome of the discussion is placed that much in jeopardy. By avoiding manipulation as much as possible, you will help the negotiations proceed toward a more mutually satisfying agreement. This is often like the old saying, don't change horses in the middle of the stream. You may start out with manipulation, but then if things not going you well, you say, oh, well, I'm not really serious about this negotiation stuff. Start out with negotiation, and you say, well, I'm not getting what I want, so I'll start slipping on that slippery slope into manipulative techniques. And that's when everything starts going downhill from there.
What, real quickly, what if you're finding yourself in a negotiation and that starts to happen, and you can see the temper tantrum, or you can see the coercion starting to happen, or, facial expressions, you can see all of that stuff. What do you do in that case?
There are two things you can do and need to do, and it's hard to do because anytime someone else starts manipulating us, then we will often get tempted to slip in and get down in the gutter with them and start manipulating in retaliation. That's when it gets nasty. So if you take the higher road, as we say, then you have two options. You say, wait a minute, George, we're slipping into something that's not comfortable here. I don't really like it when you try to coerce me like that with that guilt trip. I don't respond well to guilt trips or empty threats like that, if that's an empty threat. If it's not, then, if you're really making an honest, upfront threat that you're willing to follow through with, then you need to be prepared for that. But I don't like the way this is going. Can we get back on track here and follow the basic principles and start and settle down on the emotions and get back on track and do it correctly. So you can challenge the other person to stay off that garbage and say, I don't want that to be part of our discussion. So let's back up and start over again. If the other person does not respond to that well, and often they don't, because you caught them red-handed,
they're going to get defensive.
They're going to get really angry, defensive, and sometimes they'll just get up and walk away, or they'll even get more coercive and more manipulative and more abusive. And so you have the second option. If they're not willing to get back on track and do it correctly, then you say, obviously this is not being productive. We're not getting anywhere here. I don't like this. It's manipulation. Doesn't feel good. So I'm going to cut off the conversation now, and when you're ready to do it correctly, you get back in touch with me, and we'll start over again. But I'm not going to go down this slippery slope with you. Mm-hmm. And you just get up and walk away.
You just call a spade a spade.
Yeah, you call a spade and not put up with it. Mm-hmm. And boy, that is hard to do, especially when the stakes are high on something that's really important to you.
Yeah.
So you just don't put up with it.
It takes a lot of humility for that other person to come back and say, okay, I'm ready.
Yes.
That takes a lot of courage and manipulation.
Yeah, so it's tricky when...
I'm sorry, humiliation. Humility is what I'm trying to say.
Yes, it takes a lot of humility. And it takes a lot of courage to challenge the other person when they start becoming manipulative. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay, and finally, number 8. Confirm the agreement.
And this is the tying everything up in a bow, so to speak, is that after all the negotiations are done, then you don't just walk away and say, okay, I think we understand each other now, so let's get on, whatever else we're doing. But you have to spend some time and invest time and energy of saying, let's lay it out now. What have we agreed to? What are you going to do and what am I going to do specifically that can be measured and we can each be held accountable for and hold ourselves accountable for? So let's go over it and talk it through. As I understand it, what we've agreed to do is yada, 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 yada. And is that the way you understand it? And it has to be measurable, non-confusing, doesn't have to be interpreted. Like if someone says, well, yeah, okay, I'll do better, or I'll give it a try. Well, see, that's not a real commitment. It's very vague, and so that's not something that can be measured or be held accountable for. So you have to, here again, know your communication skills really well. But when you've made an agreement, don't just let it peter out and get up and go about washing the dishes or something. You have to say, let's lay it down, and if necessary, we'll write it out on paper. When, what are we going to do and when are we going to do it? And are we both agreed to that? And so you wind it up and tie ribbon around it so that you don't leave any dangling strings.
I mean, this could be useful from anything from... figuring out the house cleaning responsibilities and the yard work, to deciding where to go on a vacation, to making some huge life changes in the middle of your life.
Oh yes, it applies to every situation, both small and big.
Or something even more behavioral. It doesn't have to be an event. It could be something very behavioral as well.
Like the gambling example I gave a while ago.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Could we go through an example or two of how this might work in real time? Like, let's say a vacation. Mm-hmm. And let's say one person wants to go to the beach and one wants to go to the mountains. Can you talk about how that might, so it's not so formal and everything, how does one negotiate that?
Well, it can be negotiated several ways. Like with the example that you gave, you want to go 2 different places, and obviously, you can't go to both of them at the same time. So you might look around and get on the internet or talk to your travel agent and say, is there a place that we could go that we could afford that might provide both of those activities of beach and mountain climbing at the same time? Are there some places within our budget that we could both go and enjoy different aspects of activities on the same vacation? So you could negotiate possibly going to a different place that satisfies both of those needs or desires.
Or maybe having one year you go to the beach and 1 year you go to the mountains, but you better agree on that.
Oh yeah.
Or even deciding on a movie, you know. Yeah, okay, I'm not crazy about those action things, but I know you want to see that. But next time I would like to go see the chick flick, you know.
Exactly. So in negotiating, that doesn't mean that both of you are going to get what you want at that particular time about that particular event. You may have to negotiate in both of these examples over a period of time where both of you get some of your needs met part of the time, but not at the same time. So it might be next week, next month, next year, but you have to take sometimes a long look in your negotiation process, because it sometimes takes time for both of you to get what you want.
And this is particularly, the negotiation skills need to particularly be honed when you have been living a life together for a while and there are some serious life changes that need to happen. And I know in my own personal life, the thing that got me stuck was I wanted a change, but I wasn't willing to give up certain things. And you must have a give and take.
And that's when it gets tough.
Especially when we're talking about big life changes.
Yes. And sometimes, and that here again, negotiation is very often not done in just one or two sessions. You may have to talk about something for months or years even when you're negotiating a lifestyle change. So this is not an easy, quick process to go through on these big matters like this. So this is where finding out for yourself and from your partner what you want and what you want most is part of that process, because when you want big changes, it's gonna have big costs involved, and you have to be willing to pay the price for that.
And what I've discovered through having gone through that, those big costs are sometimes really incredible, because we don't know what we don't know. And you think, well, I've moved into this huge house, I love it, I've been working on this for 25-30 years, I've got my big career going, but you're stressed out all the time, you're miserable, you have a terrible work situation, but you're not willing to give up that big house. And people forget the quality of life, and that you can have, my house now is quite small and my quality of life is quite good. And if we're willing to give up even some big things, we can surprise ourselves with what we can live with and without.
And like you intimated here, there'll be some residual, somewhat unexpected costs and benefits along the way that we had not planned on. Like if you change your lifestyle, then you're going to have to change your friends as well.
Yes.
And you're going to lose some relationships and some social circles and business circles that you perhaps had not anticipated having to give up because you changed your lifestyle. And so the cost can be like ripples in a stream, in a pond. When you toss a rock into it, you're going to have the ripple effect of gains and losses along the way that you had not anticipated. And this is where being willing to go with the flow and accept unexpected changes, costs and benefits, without holding resentment toward yourself or toward your partner because you didn't know how much you were going to have to pay for that. And then you can hold grudges against yourself or others because of losses you had not thought you'd have to suffer.
And just letting go, just not clinging. When I was going through a lot of life changes, I had this image of, being in rapids and just clinging to the sides of the cliffs, just with bare knuckles. And you don't have to do that.
No.
You just have to...
Well, sometimes you may have to.
Well, yeah.
If the cost is significant, you may be clinging by your fingernails for a while.
But it can work out to your benefit in most cases when you are needing to make those changes.
And this is where you have to keep focusing on the benefits that accrue from changes that are made, whether it's negotiated with a partner or whether you have to do it yourself, and not focus on the losses all the time, because there are going to be losses.
Yeah.
There's no way to avoid it. So life is not without sadness and grief and loss. But the main thing is not hold resentments because life didn't turn out the way you wanted it to, or that you didn't get everything that you wanted.
Right. It's about getting grown up about this.
That's the bottom line.
Exactly. Well, we'll start up with Chapter 17, A Matter of Opinion, next time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to our podcast. Again, Dr. Austin's ebook is available on Amazon Kindle, Barnes & Noble, Scribd, Booktopia, Apple Books, Layman's, and Adlibris. We look forward to having you join us for our next podcast.